this isn't something taught by priests. It might be something that priests and other ethicists remind us of.
Yes.
So we can have an inbuilt moral sense that's got a biological basis that still requires cultural activation and modification. And the analog to that would be our instinct for language. You can't teach chimpanzees language because they don't have the biological capacity for it, or not to the degree that we do, although some parrots can perform remarkable stunts in that regard. But we still have to be taught language, or we have to be at least put in an environment where it's happening. So
exactly. And it just because, there's a language instinct, but that doesn't mean that every child is born speaking Hebrew, as James II, King of England, supposed to have, James I is supposed to have thought was going to be the case. I
would say that I've studied archetypal representations of moral behavior, because I think that dramatic stories represent various pathways through life, like pathways writ large, right? Drama is life with all the boring bits edited out. And what drama is trying to present to us are different modes of behavior, some of them unsatisfactory, and those would be the bad guys, and some of them highly satisfactory. And I would say the central hero in dramatic representations is someone who's as fully reciprocal as possible. That's what the drama is aiming at. And I think that's also what you're doing with your children when you teach them to be good sports when they're playing a game. You basically say to them something like, although you don't know this, you say something like, it doesn't matter whether you win or lose, it matters how you play the game. And the reason that matters, and this is the part you don't say because you don't know it, is that life is a never-ending series of diverse games. And your goal, as if you want to be a winner, is to be invited to play as many games as possible. And what that means is that you have to have a morality that works across the set of all possible games, and it has to trump the morality that drives you to win a single game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the phrase for that is enlightened self-interest as opposed to short-term self-interest. And I think it's a very important insight. For me, the interesting one is that connects with economic optimism. That connects with how we got to be so much better off, because it brought us the division of labor. It essentially enabled us to say, look, I'll make the spears, you make the axes, and we'll both be better off because we'll both be good at what we're doing. And even if I'm better at making both spears and axes than you are, it still pays me, because I'm slightly better at making spears than axes, for me to make the spears and get you to make the axes. That's the basis of trade. That's David Ricardo's theory in one Stone Age story.
Yeah, so when we started to be intelligent enough and sophisticated enough so that a debt could be repaid in currency other than that in which it was accrued. Correct. And so what that must have meant was that we developed the abstract representation of a reciprocal debt. Not only did we reciprocate like chimpanzees do, for example, with grooming, but we could conceptualize the fact that we owed or were owed, and then we're able to be repaid in all sorts of different manners. So,
and by the way, it wasn't in this book, but it was in The Rational Optimist that I did quite a diversion into the history of trade. And it's very persuasive that trade is far, far older than agriculture. That pre-agricultural people were trading probably 100,000 years ago. The oldest evidence we've got is seashells moving long distances inland from the coast of North Africa around 100,000 years ago. And they're moving these long distances not because somebody's walking hundreds of miles to the seashore, picking up some seashells and walking back, but because they're going hand to hand from tribes. And we can find, I think I do tell the story in The Origins of Virtue of the Yuront, who were an Aboriginal tribe living in northern Australia, who were getting stingray barbs, as many stingray barbs as they wanted on the coast by catching stingrays. But what they really wanted was stone axes. And several hundred miles inland, there was a quarry that produced stone axes. And the tribe that owned that traded with the Yuront via several other trades. And you can actually see the exchange rate of stingray barbs for stone axes along that trail. So that's
Well, I think
people being nice to each other when they could be fighting each other.
Right. Well, I think it was in the Origins of Virtue too that you chased the idea of trade down into the past even further, relating it to the strange human propensity to share food, and associated that as well with hunting. And I believe you used the example of mammoths, which is also an example that I've found fascinating, because obviously you can't store a whole mammoth, but you can store it in the form of your reputation by sharing it. And if you store it in the form of your reputation as a generous hunter, then you can be repaid back indefinitely in a currency that doesn't spoil. So maybe and you do outline it in this manner, human beings share food in a very egalitarian manner within families. So men and women share food, men mostly meat, historically speaking, and women mostly what they gather. And that makes for a balanced diet. And that ability to exchange food seems to me to be perhaps the biological platform on which the idea of trade per se was able to evolve. So once you can share food and trade and enter into a reciprocal arrangement with regards to food, then it isn't that much of a leap to start do that with other commodities, especially those that might be related to the provision of food, like stone axes or arrows or any implement of that sort.
I'm rather fascinated by the fact that a sexual division of labor over food is very, very universal and ancient, that men hunt and women gather, essentially, in hunter-gatherer societies. Now, in some societies, gathering is much more important than hunting, and in some societies, hunting is much more important than gathering, like the Inuit, for example, is the latter case. And there are sort of odd types of foraging that are neither gathering nor hunting. So honey tends to be something that men get, but because it tends to be that you get it from hunting, it's like hunting, as it were. And digging up reptiles and rats tends to be something that women do because it's like digging up roots. Now, some people think this is a sexist view, that I'm saying, a woman's place is digging, a man's place is out hunting. But I think it's just that, unlike other species, we really did invent this really useful distinction whereby you got the best of both worlds. You got the protein from hunting, but you got the reliability of food from gathering. So on the whole, you